Gold participants and listeners from around the world. I'm Kristen Schwartz, licensed midwife and MC for Gold Learning. And today I'm chatting with Elizabeth Johnson. Elizabeth, welcome.
Thanks, Kristen. So glad to be back.
It is so nice to have you back here with us at Gold. You will be presenting in the Gold Lactation Online Conference 2019, correct?
Yes, I will.
That's exciting. We're glad to have you back. And we want to talk about your topic in a little bit. And some of our listeners are already familiar with you, who remember you from last time around. But to our listeners who are new or were not able to catch your presentation last time, can you tell our listeners a little bit about you? Starting off, where are you located in the world so our international audience can have a little picture where you are, and then give
Mm.
us a little background information on your work.
Excellent. Yes. So I am actually located in Durham, North Carolina. So I'm in the southeast United States, generally pretty warm. And I am originally from Connecticut, so originally from the northeastern part of the United States. I am so excited to be back and talking about this topic, which I don't know if you know this, Kristen, but this topic is a brand new topic for me, and it's really rooted in comments and feedback I got from Gold Lactation 2018 participants.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so there was a lot of I got some really good feedback from those folks who had attended and said, I love this information. I feel like I've got a really great grounding here, Elizabeth.
Mm,
But I think what I need next is some real practical strategies. And I thought that
wonderful.
was a fantastic idea, right? And because, we sometimes we get all of this great information, but yet we don't quite know what the best way to implement it is. And
Right.
so I'm hoping to kind of bridge that gap with this presentation.
That is wonderful. I'm glad how you took the suggestions that were offered by attendees and turned it into research and come up with a brand new presentation based on feedback you received. That's amazing. That's wonderful.
Isn't that neat? I love that. I
Yeah.
think one of the best ways that we can kind of continue to do the work that we do well and serve folks who really need the information is to continually
Mhm.
listen to that population and say, what are the pieces that are missing? What are the
Right.
roadblocks that you're facing? And then, translate that into tools that are practical.
Amazing. That's wonderful. Practical tools we can actually use in our practice and actually implement, right?
Yes, so
Absolutely.
vital, so vital.
Yes, absolutely. Now, before we talk about the presentation, I know everybody wants to know more about it. And the title is Connection Over Perfection, Practical Strategies for Supporting Challenging Parents. Tell us a little bit about your background. You are a trauma educator, right? Tell us a little bit more about you and your background and how, I mean, you explained to us how this presentation come about, but maybe weave into it a little bit about your background and what makes it so special that we have the connection here with you.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm a rape survivor, so I identify as a rape survivor myself. And one of the things that I noticed when I was really when I was a brand new mom, I'd spent a lot of time doing training and education, talking with community partners about how abuse affects people later in life, and of course also in the moment. So dealing with folks who were in crisis situations. But one thing I noticed after I had my own daughter was that there wasn't a lot of information around how past abuse might surface at vulnerable times for people. So, like the vulnerable time that I was in, and at that moment, being a new mom in the postpartum period, alone, with a child for a long part of the day by yourself, doing the very best that you could at breastfeeding. And I thought, this is really interesting. I can't believe that I don't have any information or resources, and no one has ever mentioned to me before that breastfeeding might be challenging. Breastfeeding could be triggering. I know some folks who are survivors whose milk didn't come in, or lots of different kinds of challenges that providers don't necessarily know about because there's not always a lot of research on. And it's certainly not stuff that people get in medical school or in nursing school. And some of our doulas and some of our midwives do get this information and our IBCLCs, but it's just spotty. And so I thought, wait a second, I can distill this information. I can find some of that research because there's great research out there, but again, it's like who's getting it and how do we get it to the people who really,
Mm.
really need it? And so I thought I can do that. I'm a really good researcher, I'm a really good trainer. And so that's where I started to kind of come back to working for myself and building this niche of how past sexual abuse impacts later sexual and reproductive health, and kind of took it from there.
That's great that you're giving us that information because I tell you what, my background is I'm a midwife, right? And we're
Mm,
supposed to screen for that when, when we're meeting new parents in, in prenatal visits. But then it
yes,
becomes, as you said, the information becomes spotty. What do we do with that information?
right.
Yeah, we're supposed to, provide resources and maybe, give resources of, therapists and counselors, but that's I feel that's not enough, so
Mhm.
I'm really glad that you're bringing up this topic here. What can we actually do to really be supportive and not step into any areas, number one, when we don't know about, or have situations that we do not think about that could be triggering, as you say,
Mhm.
so I don't think just sending somebody off to a counselor or providing handouts with resources is quite enough. So I'm really, really excited about the topic you are presenting on, and that you will actually present us with tools that we can use in our practice. So tell us a little bit about this presentation um, that you're giving then, a little bit more in detail.
Yeah, so I think that you really hit the nail on the head, Kristen, when you say that the information sometimes can be overwhelming when we do have it, and what do we do with it afterwards? And so I think that's a really common challenge for people. And another common challenge, I think, is what do we do when we suspect someone possibly is a trauma survivor, and how do we respond more sensitively? And so one of the things that we're going to be talking about in this, that I'm going to be talking about in this presentation, is the idea of trauma being something that's very common, and it can present in ways that show up and are challenging for the provider. And so
Mm,
how do we sort of circumnavigate, how do we get around that, how
right,
do we sort of meet someone where they're at
right.
and start to think maybe what they're showing me is that they are a trauma survivor, and so how do I need to tune into them a little bit differently? What are some differences in language that I can use?
Mm.
How can I get to trust more effectively and frankly quickly when we sometimes time may be of the essence with in our situation or how we're providing support and resources to people. And so it's a lot of pieces around how do we respond better,
Yes.
and what can we do and be more effective so trust is there, because when trust is there, there is a lot of gains to be made. Our work feels more smooth, it feels easier, it feels more satisfying. And it's
Yeah.
funny to sometimes think that trust is one of those barriers, but it really is.
No, I can absolutely see that trust is a barrier, and how can we expect people who have suffered abuse even be able to trust us to begin with, right? I mean, they went through so much, and you're right. If you're suspecting, if you meet somebody in your practice and you're suspecting she had is a survivor of sexual abuse or violence, how do you approach that in a sensitive way without, because you can't just often blurt out, have you been abused? I mean, that's,
Right.
that might not work for everybody, and it
Mhm.
might kind of give people they're clamping up and shutting down and avoiding the subject, and what do you do also with people who kind of have shut that out of their own lives, that,
Yeah.
or kind of trying to deal with it by kind of shutting down,
Yes.
so you're
Yes.
absolutely right. It is such an important topic, and honestly, frankly, I don't think many of us have enough knowledge and then resources available to really be of help to our clients there in an efficient
Right.
way.
Yeah,
So,
I think one of the biggest challenges, and I just did grand rounds close by to me
mm,
at Duke University,
mhm,
their medical
mm,
school, and I was talking to OBGYN residents and students and
mm,
fellows, and one of the big questions that everyone asks me, no matter if they're in med school or if they're a doula or an IBCLC, is what do I say?
yeah,
What do I say that will not, dig myself in deeper? But
right,
also, what do I say that can be reassuring, that can be
right,
empowering, that can go back to this idea of like generating trust, building trust? And so that's one of the
exactly.
biggest pieces that we're going to talk about. What can we say that's helpful and trust building?
Right, exactly, absolutely. That sounds wonderful. I am looking so much forward to this presentation, hopefully learning so much that we can take in our own practice and be, all we want to really do is support our families, support our new mothers, and to the best of our abilities. And I think that, building trust, as you mentioned, is one thing, and also having the right tools, having the right words. Words are so powerful, um,
Yes,
to
yes,
to
they
to
absolutely
be
are.
there with our families. Before I let you go, one last question. What are you hoping our listeners will take away from this presentation?
Oh gosh, if there's one thing that I would hope listeners would take away, it would be that to perhaps share my belief that all of us are
Mm,
trauma survivors. And that doesn't necessarily mean we are all sexual trauma survivors, but each of us in our lives have experienced something that was disturbing to us or that changed us. And if we can sort of dig deep into that idea that I'm a trauma survivor, this person in front of me is a trauma survivor, we're more inclined to use
mhm,
empathy and to
mhm,
kind of pull back on judgment. And so I think that is one of my biggest things that I
mm,
kind of like to emphasize to people is that we're all trauma survivors. It looks different for different people and it's different kinds
right.
of trauma, but that person across the table from you is very similar to you in some way that maybe you don't even know.
That's a very, very interesting perspective. Um, I really enjoy that. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, thank you so much, Elizabeth Johnson, for sitting down here with me today and chatting about the presentation and giving us such an, opening up about your background as well. We
Yes.
really appreciate that because I am assume that's not an easy thing to talk about and be open about.
Well, at this point, I like to say that the more people who feel comfortable and it feels comfortable for and safe for them to
Mm-hmm.
talk about their past abuse, I think the better. And that means, and if I'm one of those people, I'm part of I facilitate a weekly support group for sexual abuse survivors here in Durham, where I live. It's a free
Hmm.
support group. It happens every week, and some of the women in that room feel comfortable saying it and some don't. But I think that when we can say it, it just sort of lessens stigma and it also helps people better understand how trauma can look different in different people. So that's,
Right.
I think, but thank you for noting that. I appreciate the recognition that you bring to that statement.
Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth Johnson, for talking with me here today, and we are looking forward to your presentation.
You are so welcome. Have a great one. Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you. And to our listeners here, Connection over Perfection, Practical Strategies for Supporting Challenging Parents will be live on April 24th. This presentation is part of the Gold Lactation Online Conference of 2019. For more information on this presentation and on other presentations in the conference, please visit goldlactation.com. Thank you everyone for listening, and I hope to see you at the conference. Bye bye for now.